Montana Territory, June 1879. The sky cracked open with color as the sun crawled above the mountains. But the land stayed cold, quiet, and waiting. Maddox Rylan swung his leg over the fence rail, boots hitting the dirt with a low thump. He had been up since long before first light, as usual. The cattle needed checking, the creek had to be cleared of brush after last week's storm, and the barn roof still leaked in the northeast corner. His was a life of work and silence, and he carried it like a second skin. He adjusted his hat, rubbing sleep from gritty eyes, and turned toward the east pasture. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. A shape slumped against the fence post near the creek, tangled in shadow and morning fog. But as he got closer, his steps slowed. The figure was real. A woman. Shackled at the wrists, dirt smeared across her dress, had bowed like she had not moved in hours. "Ma'am?" Maddox said, voice low even. She flinched but did not speak. He crouched a few feet away, careful not to spook her. Her ankles were scraped raw, her hands bound in rusted iron cuffs looped through a length of chain fixed to the fence rail. Whoever left her there meant for her to stay. "You hurt anywhere bad?" he asked. Her eyes finally lifted. Blue, not sky blue, not icy either. Just clear. Honest. Her face was pale under the grime, but something in her jaw held firm, like she had been through worse and still had fight left. "I am freezing," she whispered. Maddox stood and pulled off his coat, stepping forward slow. "I have a cabin just over that rise. A mile, maybe less. I can cut the chain, get you warm." She hesitated, nodding once. It took 3 strikes of his hatchet to break the chain. She winced when he helped her stand, but said nothing. Her name was Sela Fairley, and she did not ask where they were going. She just followed Maddox across the pasture, barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, her thin frame trembling under his coat. Inside the cabin, he stoked the fire and brought her water. She sat on the edge of the cot, near enough to the heat that her cheeks flushed pink. "Who did that to you?" he asked. Sela stared at the flames, her voice quiet. "A man passing through Helena. I worked at a boarding house there. He said he was headed east, offered me coin to help on the road. I should have known better." Maddox's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He handed her a tin cup of broth instead. "I woke up in the wagon, tied. He said he was going to sell me." Sela's fingers curled around the cup. "But something scared him off last night. I heard wolves or maybe gunfire. He unhitched and ran. Left me there." Maddox watched her for a long moment. "You got anyone? Family?" Her eyes flicked to his. "No," he nodded, then turned to stir the fire again. His own story was not any brighter. No family left. No letters coming west. Just the land and the work. He had come to Montana 5 years before with a trail herd and never left. "I can help you get to town when you are ready," he said. "Sheriff, there is decent. You can stay here a couple days, until you get your strength back." Sela looked down at her hands. "I do not want to go to town." Maddox turned. "Then what do you want?" Her voice wavered. "To stay someplace safe. Just for a little while." He nodded once. "All right." He gave her space, sleeping in the hayloft above the barn while she rested inside. In the mornings, she stood in the doorway, arms tucked around her chest, watching the mist lift off the grass. She never said much, but she listened when he talked about the work, the land, the small things that filled a quiet life. By the 3rd day, she was helping with the chickens and washing her own linens by the creek. He noticed how she started humming under her breath, soft and low, while she worked. He did not mention it, but it made something in his chest ease a little. That evening, she sat beside him on the porch. The sun was setting, casting gold across the hills. "I was not sure I would make it through the night," she said. "Before you found me." "You did," he said. "You held on." Sela looked over at him. "Why did you help me?" Maddox shrugged. "You needed help. But most folks would have walked past. Called the sheriff. Left it at that." He looked out at the fields. "I have been on my own a long time. Maybe I just knew what it felt like." She was quiet for a long moment. "You said you have no family." "No," he said. Not anymore. I do, she said. I have a daughter. Maddox turned to her, eyes sharp. I did not tell that man. I was afraid he would go looking. She is 6. Her name is Ada. I left her with a woman in Helena when I took that job. I thought I would be back in 3 days. His heart thudded once. Heavy. I need to go get her, Sela said, voice shaking. I need to bring her here. I just do not know if she is still there. I will take you, Maddox said, no hesitation. She looked at him, surprised. You saved my life, she said. He shook his head. You were still breathing when I found you. That was you. But I will help you bring your daughter home. Sela blinked fast, then reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm. Thank you, she whispered. Maddox did not say anything, but he turned his hand over and held hers. The porch was quiet, the sun nearly gone. But something else had settled between them, something steady, like a promise. Tomorrow they would go to Helena. But tonight they sat together in the hush of dusk, both of them knowing, somehow, that the worst was behind them. And maybe, just maybe, the best was still ahead. They left before first light. Sela had wrapped her feet in strips of old flour sack she found drying by the hearth, then laced Maddox's spare boots over them. They were too large, but she walked steady. He packed bread, jerky, and 2 canteens, strapping them behind the saddle. She rode with him, side saddle at first, but as the hills thickened with pine and the path narrowed, she shifted forward, her arms circling his waist without a word. The ride to Helena cut through a valley where snow still lingered in the creases of north-facing slopes. Every so often a hawk wheeled overhead, but otherwise the land held still. Maddox kept the pace brisk. By mid-morning they crossed a shallow ford and the sound of hooves in water startled a deer into the brush. Sela's fingers tightened at his belt. You all right? He asked without turning. She nodded against his back. It's just strange. Being free and not hiding. They reached the edge of Helena by late afternoon. The town sat crouched against the hills, built in tiers of timber and brick. Smoke from cook fires curled into the amber sky. A freight wagon creaked past as they turned down a rutted alley behind the livery. Maddox helped her down, then handed the reins to a boy with a red kerchief tied around his neck. I remember the street, Sela said, brushing dust from her skirt. That red door, Miss Gailey's place. She took Ada when I left. They walked slow. Sela didn't knock, just opened the gate and stepped onto the porch. Maddox stood back, hat in hand. A woman answered before Sela reached the door. She was short, stout, and wore a flour-dusted apron. Her eyes grew wide. Well, mercy. Thought you were dead, girl. I almost was, Sela said. Miss Gailey stepped aside. She's upstairs. Been asking for you every day. Sela didn't wait. She climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, vanished through the second door on the left. Maddox stayed on the porch, watching the wind stir the curtains in the window above. When she came back down, the child clung to her hip, sleepy-eyed and clinging to her mother's collar. Maddox had never seen anything so small and certain. Ada's hair was darker than Sela's, but her gaze had that same quiet clarity. They spent that night under Miss Gailey's roof. Sela didn't leave Ada's side, and Maddox slept on a bedroll near the stove. The next morning, with a basket of bread and a bundle of linens packed tight, they started south again. Maddox rode ahead this time, letting Sela and Ada have the saddle. Ada sat nestled between her mother's arms, watching the trees pass with wide eyes. She's not afraid, Maddox said when they paused to water the horse. She's been through worse, Sela replied. They made camp that night near a ridge where the grass grew thick and the stars came clear. Maddox set a low fire and rolled out an extra blanket. Sela tucked Ada beside her, then sat across from Maddox, hands wrapped around a tin cup. She asks about her father sometimes, she said. Maddox didn't speak. I never knew him long. He worked the rails. Said he'd send for us when he got settled in Cheyenne. He didn't. He watched the fire snap. She's got your spine? She'll need it out here. They sat quiet for a while. Then she looked up. You've been good to us. I don't know what you expect in return. I don't expect anything, he said. I know, she whispered. That's why I trust you. He looked across the flames, her face lit soft by firelight, her hair loose at the shoulders now. The girl stirred once, then settled against her mother's side. "I'd like to stay," Sela said. "If you meant it about the cabin." "I meant it." She nodded, and for the first time there was something like ease in her shoulders. "I can cook," she added. "Mend, too. Ada will help with eggs and small things." "We'll need to build on," he said. "There's room out back, near the cottonwoods." Sela smiled, then not out of politeness or gratitude, but something deeper. Like she'd found her footing again. Maddox leaned back on his elbows, watching the smoke drift upward. He didn't know if the ache in his chest was relief or something older. Something opened up by the sight of that girl resting safe in her mother's arms. He didn't know yet what it meant to have hope return to him in the shape of two people. But as the fire burned low, he knew he'd carry it, whatever it asked of him. By the time they reached the cabin again, the wind had shifted. Drier, warmer, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and thawed earth. Spring had taken hold at last, loosening winter's grip 1 inch at a time. Maddox hitched the mare near the barn and lifted Ada down. She clung to her mother's skirts, eyes darting across the unfamiliar yard. Sela crouched beside her and pointed toward the henhouse. "That's where the eggs come from, see? We'll check them in the morning." The child nodded, but her hands stayed locked in Sela's. They stepped inside, and Maddox watched as Sela moved through the space with quiet certainty. She folded the linens in the chest near the hearth, set Ada's basket of clothes beneath the cot, and took down the tin lantern to polish the soot off its glass. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You settle fast." Sela looked over her shoulder. "You said we could stay. You can." She straightened, brushing her palms against her skirt. "Then I'll make it a home." That night, she boiled water over the fire and washed Ada's hair in a basin, humming a tune Maddox didn't recognize. He stepped out to give them privacy, chopping kindling by the woodpile until the moon lifted over the pines. When he came back in, Ada was asleep beneath a quilt and Sela was seated at the table, darning a tear in one of his shirts. "You don't have to," he began. "I want to," she said, not looking up. He sat across from her. The lamplight flickered over the curve of her cheek and the fine thread drawn taut between her fingers. "Do you miss Helena?" he asked. She paused, needle frozen above the fabric. "No. I don't think I ever belonged to a place like that." "What kind of place do you belong to?" She set the shirt down. "One where no one owns another person. Where a girl can grow up safe and a woman's not a thing to be traded. Somewhere the nights are quiet and the man sitting across the table doesn't need to prove anything with words." Maddox met her gaze. "That's the kind of place I've been trying to build." Sela reached for the lantern and turned the wick lower. "Then let's build it together." The next days passed not in ease, but in rhythm. Maddox taught Ada how to coax the hens back into the coop before dusk. Sela found a patch of earth near the back wall where the soil turned dark and soft and began arranging rows for seed. She asked Maddox to fetch her a few sacks of flour and a spool of twine from the trading post next town over, and when he returned, she'd bake 2 loaves and patch the torn curtain above the wash basin. One afternoon, he found her in the clearing west of the barn, Ada asleep in a nest of wild grass beside her. She was tying a string between 2 young pines, measuring space for what would become a line of laundry posts. "You don't stop," he said. She smiled without turning. "I've stopped before. It didn't get me far." He crouched beside her, resting his arms on his knees. "You ever think about leaving again?" "Not anymore." Maddox glanced at the child, breathing slow beneath the hand-stitched shawl. "She's strong. She never cried once when I was gone. Miss Gailey told me." Sela's voice softened. "I think she believed I'd come back." He stood and offered her his hand. "You did." She took it, rising to her feet. "I think it was you that brought me back." That evening, they ate outside. The table dragged beneath the cottonwoods. The wind had stilled. A pair of doves settled on the fence rail, cooing into the hush. Ada sat between them, her knees pulled up, crumbs clinging to her chin. When the girl drifted off, Sela carried her inside and returned with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Maddox handed her a tin cup of warm cider, and they sat quiet again, side by side. He cleared his throat. "You think you could be happy here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned into his shoulder, slow, certain. "I already am." He let his arm rest around her, not as a question, but as something earned. The kind of closeness that didn't ask for promises because the truth of it was already sewn into the days they'd lived side by side. The stars turned overhead and the fire burned down to ash. The land lay quiet around them, not empty anymore, but full of the life they were building, one breath, one morning, one shared silence at a time. The first full rain came on a Tuesday, soft and steady, soaking the soil without wind or warning. Maddox stood on the porch sharpening a draw knife, watching the water thread down the slope toward the creek. Sela leaned against the doorframe behind him, Ada perched on her hip, one hand in her mother's hair. "She keeps asking about your tools," Sela said, glancing down. "Wants to know what each one's for." Maddox set the draw knife aside. "She's welcome to learn, long as she stays clear of the blade edge." Sela shifted Ada to her other hip. "Could you show her?" "When the weather clears." Maddox nodded, brushing filings from his hands. "I will. She's quick. Picks things up without being told twice." Ada twisted toward him, her voice small but certain. "Do you know how to build a ladder?" "I do," Maddox said. "You want one?" "For the tree behind the barn," she said. "I want to see the top." Sela raised a brow. "You're not climbing anything without me nearby." "I'll make it strong," Maddox said. "One you can both trust." By Thursday, the rain had passed, leaving the air rich with scent. Maddox took Ada out to the shed where the cedar planks were kept stacked along the wall. He showed her how to measure against the grain, how to mark with a coal nub, how to square the ends. She didn't say much, but her eyes never left his hands. Sela watched from the window, a basket of damp washing in her lap. When they returned, Ada's cheeks were red from wind and pride. She carried a wooden rung, smoothed and sanded, tucked under her arm like a treasure. That night, as Sela stirred cornmeal into a pot of beans, she said, "You're good with her." Maddox leaned his shoulder against the post beside the hearth. "She makes it easy. She doesn't with everyone." He studied the firelight flickering across her face. "That man from Helena, he hurt her?" "No," she said. "But she saw too much. I think she stopped speaking for a few days after I left." Maddox's jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. Sela turned from the pot. "She needs steadiness. Someone who doesn't vanish when the light changes." He stepped forward, slow. "I don't plan to." "I know," she said. Her hand reached out, brushing his sleeve. "That's why I'm not afraid anymore." Later, once Ada was settled beneath the quilt, they sat on the porch. The ladder lay finished beside the steps, drying in the night air. Sela rested her elbows on her knees, watching the stars blink through the thinning clouds. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. Maddox shook his head. "I buried too many years here to start over again. Even if something better waited somewhere else?" He looked at her. "There's nothing better than what we're building now." She didn't reply, just reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. He let the silence stretch, then said, "You're not just passing through, are you?" "I couldn't, even if I tried." The porch creaked beneath their boots as they leaned into each other. No rush, no need. Just the sound of frogs near the water and the wind moving through the pine. From inside, Ada shifted once, then stilled again. Maddox listened, heart slow, grounded. He thought of what it meant to belong not to a place, but to people. To a little girl who wanted to climb trees and to a woman who had learned to trust her own voice again. He glanced at Sela, her face turned toward his. "When the frost breaks for good, I want to build a second room. Give you both space to grow." She drew his hand to her cheek. "We already have, Maddox. We already have." By late May, the cottonwoods had leafed out fully, casting dappled shade over the yard. Bees lingered along the fence line where the wild rose had started to bloom. The days stretched longer now, the cold retreating for good. Maddox had built the second room off the cabin's west wall, hammering in the last plank just as Ada ran out with a strip of blue calico to tie around the doorknob. Sela stood in the doorway wiping her hands on her apron. "She says it's her sign. So no one walks in without knocking." "That'll be easy," Maddox said, laying his hammer on the step. "She's the only one with a room." Sela laughed at the sound light. "She earned it." "You both did." The new room meant the main space breathed easier. Sela rearranged the table to catch the afternoon light and hung a length of muslin across the hearth to keep the ash from drifting toward Ada's books when the wind turned. They ate outside most nights now, the table set beneath the eaves where the warm air carried the scent of turned soil and sun-warmed grass. One evening, Sela pulled out a small cloth sack she kept tucked in the corner of her trunk. From it, she unfolded a worn, creased paper. Maddox leaned closer and Ada crawled up beside him. "It's a claim," Sela said. "Filed under my name. South of Missoula. My grandfather left it to me, but I never had the means to go see it." Maddox's brow furrowed. "You want to work land that far west?" Sela shook her head. "No. I want to sell it. Miss Gailey sent a letter, said someone offered to buy the rights if I could come sign. It's not much, but enough to start a small herd. Chickens are fine, but I'd rather not be chasing eggs the rest of my life." Ada leaned against her mother's side. "Can we have a calf?" Maddox met Sela's eyes. "You want me to ride with you?" "I'd like that." They left the following Thursday, taking only what they needed. Maddox asked his nearest neighbor, a Swedish widow named Annalise, to stay at the cabin with Ada. The ride took 4 days, the trail winding through green hills and thick stands of pine. Sela didn't speak much that first day. Her mind turned inward. But each night by the fire, she leaned closer. On the second evening, she reached over and took his hand without hesitation. "I didn't think I'd ever trust a man to ride beside me again," she said, eyes fixed on the flame. "You don't have to explain. I want to." She turned toward him then, her voice quiet but steady. "I was raised to believe a woman's worth came from how little trouble she made. How well she followed. But being taken changed something. I don't want to follow anymore. I want to walk beside." Maddox closed his fingers around hers. "Then that's how we'll do it." In Missoula, she signed the deed at a clerk's desk that still smelled of ink and beeswax. The buyer handed over a leather pouch heavy with coin, and Sela counted it twice before tucking it into her pocket. "You sure you want cattle?" Maddox asked as they walked out into the sunlight. "I want a future that can stand on its own legs," she said. "Cattle give milk, meat, trade. It's not just for us. It's for her." They chose 3 heifers from a man Maddox knew from his trail days. He agreed to deliver them within the week, and when Sela handed over the coin, her shoulders didn't flinch. They returned home to a cabin that smelled of fresh bread and lilac water. Ada ran out barefoot, her arms flung wide. Sela dropped to her knees and caught her, both of them laughing as they tipped back into the grass. Maddox stood watching for a long moment, the weight in his chest not heavy, but full. Later that night, after Ada had curled up in her room with the ladder rung Maddox had carved her name into, Sela stepped out onto the porch. "There's something I want to ask," she said. He turned from where he was coiling rope. "Go on. I don't need a preacher's words to know what this is between us. But I'd like to share your name. Not for show. For truth." Maddox didn't answer right away. He walked over, slow, and took her face in his hands. "You've been mine since that morning at the fence, Sela. I just didn't know how to say it." She smiled, eyes shining in the moonlight. "Then say it now." He kissed her then, not hurried, not hungry. Just steady. The kind of kiss that came after every question had been answered. They married 2 days later in the clearing where the cottonwoods met the creek. Annalise stood witness, Ada clutching a bouquet of wildflowers at her side. Sela wore a dress she'd hemmed herself, lilac-colored and soft as the wind. Maddox wore his cleanest shirt and combed his hair with his fingers. No one read scripture. No one spoke of solemn vows. But when Sela looked up into his eyes, she said the words plainly. "You are my home now." And Maddox answered, "You always were." They built a barn that summer, just big enough for the 3 heifers and a small loft where Ada liked to hide with her books. Sela planted herbs near the back stoop, and Maddox carved a bench where she could sit and watch the sun fall behind the hills. Ada grew strong with the land, her hands quick and her voice bright. She told stories to the chickens and tied ribbons to the fence posts to mark the days. At night, after the lamps were turned down and the doors bolted, Maddox and Sela lay side by side in the room he'd built with her in mind. Her fingers rested over his heart, and when the wind moved outside, it sounded like the soft hush of peace. They didn't speak of what had come before, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer held sway. The land had seen their sorrow, and now it bore their joy. And in that quiet stretch of Montana, beneath stars that knew every kind of grief and grace, they lived a life full of steady love and hard-earned rest together, always.